But today, we're going to be talking about how to get that killer business idea. And right now, we're not, the things aren't due until just January. So you may be thinking, oh, I've got plenty of time before I have to come up with an idea. But that's not the case, because we've got to come up with a great idea, and we've got to vet that idea out by doing some customer development, talking to potential customers, building your team. There's a lot of work still to be done between now and when you submit the business plan. So I'm glad that you're all here, because obviously I'm preaching to the choir. But what we'll do is as I go along, I'm going to try to make it as interactive as possible. So please, if you have a question, feel free to jump in. I'm also going to ask you guys a lot of questions too. Okay? So the killer idea for your business plan. So what does a killer idea look like? Like, how do you know if you've got a really good idea? Now look at some of those logos up there on that screen. I bet you guys know about half of them, and you don't know the other half. Okay? So obviously people know what Facebook is, right? Who here has heard of Friendster?
Pre-Facebook.
Pre-Facebook, right? So I guess most of you guys are already too young to know what Friendster was. But Friendster was the original Facebook. So Facebook did not come up with the concept of being able to create a social network online and link with your friends and be able to create a community that way. It was actually Friendster. Friendster preceded Facebook, I don't know, by at least 5 or 6 years, I'm guessing. I signed up to Friendster as soon as it came on. I thought it was one of the coolest things. But why didn't that take off? Does anybody know the story of Friendster or what happened to them? Why do you think that Facebook was able to succeed, whereas Friendster didn't? I mean, it was really pretty much the same idea. Does anybody know? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw like the Facebook movies. I don't know if it's true or not.
Right.
Maybe it's because Facebook had a target audience first. They had they aimed at college students first or something. That may have helped it. But
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be enough to overwin an established Friendster.
Sure. And so Facebook had a target market. What was Facebook's first target market when they came out? People remember? Colleges. That was brilliant. I don't know if Zuckerberg came up with that explicitly. I mean, he was maybe he fell into it, but that was one of the ways that Facebook was able to build up a really strong, tight-knit community, right? They started out with the university crowd. Anyone else here besides me use Friendster when it first came out? So what did you think of Friendster? What did you use it for?
I mean, to me it was similar to Facebook, and I don't really know what the reason Facebook succeeded in Friendster, but what I do know is that when I joined Facebook, it had such a huge momentum as it already passed a certain tipping point. So I would say maybe one difference that I know is I don't know why that happened, but when I joined Facebook, it just seemed like so many more people that were on it. For a product like that, I think that's huge, right? Because you want to get on this to be connected, and the more people that you connect to already when you join the platform is huge.
Right.
So, but how did they get that momentum and how did they get that inertia? I don't really know.
Right. So one of the things about these social communities online is that the bigger the community is, the more valuable it is to you. I mean, nowadays you get onto Facebook, and pretty much if you have a friend who isn't on Facebook, it's a little weird, right? It used to be that if you were on Friendster and you found somebody that was a friend, it was a little weird, right? So one of the things is that you got to get up to critical mass really quickly, and that was something that Friendster didn't plan for. They were actually phenomenally successful when they started out. In fact, they were way more successful than they expected to be. They were so successful, in fact, that their platform was unable to handle all the people that went online. And what really killed them was that they started having a lot of connectivity issues, a lot of lag issues, things would crash, and people just started migrating to other platforms. What about MySpace? What happened to MySpace? I didn't even put that up there. That was really good when it first started out too. Who here was on MySpace? Wow, okay, so actually, you guys are really young. So MySpace, what happened to MySpace after a while?
Wasn't the back end, that's the way it was presented, it wasn't clean. I know if it started being compared to Facebook, it wasn't a clean interface. It was like people would have all kinds of crazy backgrounds.
Yep.
It was like very, like, the brand wasn't very tight. I know, didn't Justin Timberlake buy it kind of recently and kind of revamp it for musicians? Am I making that up?
Yeah.
No, somebody bought it recently. I don't know if it was Justin
I
Timberlake.
think he's involved in
but
that.
yeah.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
I'm not, just-
So I signed up for MySpace too, and I thought it was really great. Well, MySpace started out as a music website, right? So it was a way to share in music and share, create a community around music. And it started out as really strongly as well. But one of the things that happened, as Melly pointed out, is that they didn't have really strong kind of controls on how things happened. So you'd get these crazy websites that would, pages that would take forever to load with all these blinking smiley faces and stuff like that. And they didn't control the community very well. Facebook started out the community in colleges and controlled it. You had to have a .edu email address to even get on it. MySpace let anybody come on, and then they let anybody do whatever they wanted on it. They didn't control the community. So I remember I started, when I was on MySpace, I started to get these friend requests from these really young, attractive women asking me if I wanted to have a date or whatever. And I was like, that's a little bit weird, because it started becoming a spam spot for pornography and all this other kind of stuff. And then people started migrating away because it wasn't controlled. So what Facebook did is that they controlled their growth, they maintained the quality and the brand, and they built it out from there. And then you guys all saw the social network too, so you know what happened, obviously. But that shows you how critical some of these things that seem like maybe details are so critical to the idea. And it's not something that you just come up with an idea today. I guarantee you, nobody's going to come up with a great idea and have that be the next Facebook without all these different kind of iterations. As much as I would like to believe on that inspiring, I know that that's not going to be the case, right? It's about coming up with an idea, testing it out, iterating it, and then making the idea better and better and better. And some people, like Mark Zuckerberg, was able to try different things out with Facebook and change quickly enough and adapt to be able to come up with where Facebook is now. And some weren't, like Friendster or MySpace, right? So it's about constant adaptation. It's not just about coming up with that killer idea. I call it the killer business idea, so you guys will come. But that's really not really what happens. It's about coming up with an idea that you refine over time. All right, let's look at some of these others. How about Mint and Resave? Have anybody of you guys heard of these? Yeah? Which one have you heard of?
I use Mint.
Use Mint? Okay, you can tell the rest of the class what Mint is.
So Mint is basically an online personal finance manager, and it allows you to access all your accounts in one place, and it provides services like budgeting, aggregates, stuff, tells you what your net worth is, what your liabilities are.
And WeSave actually preceded Mint by at least a year or two. And they were the market leader before Mint came on board. So my question is, what happened here? Why does WeSave went out of business about a year or two after Mint came on board? You find value in using Mint? It's a great program, right? Right. So WeSave tried to do the same thing, create an aggregation for all your financial services, and also being able to provide some, WeSave provided additional sort of advice and things like that, which Mint also does. It'll tell you, hey, you could get a better bank rate here, or hey, you could save more money if you do this, right? Mint went on to sell to Intuit for I think a couple $100 million, and WeSave went out of business and lost probably around $10 or $20 million of investors' money. There is a really great blog written by the founder of WeSave after his company went under, where he talks about why he thinks he failed and Mint succeeded. If you go look up under WeSave and postmortem or something like that on Google, you'll be able to see it. But the main message that he came up with is that, first of all, the most important thing was that he did not understand his customers well enough in terms of what they really wanted. What he tried to do at WeSave was to create a product that his customers would find super useful. that they would just be able to get so much value out of that it would just take off. Now, what's wrong with that? That sounds like a good thing, right? But what he says he didn't do that Mint did was Mint said, well, we want to create a valuable product, but we want to make it so easy to use that they don't even have to think about it. There's actually no work for them to do. You just kind of log in and it gets all the information you need, and that's it. It may not be as detailed, it might not be as powerful in terms of the information that's provided as what WeSave did, but it was easy to use, and that was the key factor that accounted for Mint's success. So the idea was really the same. The idea is, hey, let's aggregate financial information. But it was in the execution of how they went about making that user experience useful for the customers that made the difference between a $200 million exit and a $10 million loss. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Who here has heard of Cosmo? But you've all heard of FedEx, right? No one's heard of Cosmo? They raised, I think, $100 or $200 million when they came out. They were a Boston-based company. When they came out, I was like really psyched because get this, their business model was to deliver anything to you within 30 minutes. Isn't that a cool service, right? If I wanted to get ice cream in the middle of the night and I didn't want to go across town to go buy it from whatever store was open, I could call up Cosmo and they'd come and deliver it to me. And it was, I think, a flat fee of like $5 delivery fee, right? Now, what does FedEx do? FedEx is, it's get something to you within a day, right? From anywhere, anytime. So maybe this is comparing a little bit apples to oranges. But why was FedEx able to succeed, whereas Cosmo didn't? Okay. Who knows how the FedEx model works? Yes?
I believe they ship everything to a central hub and then goes out from there based upon logistical algorithms.
Right.
As to how quickly they can get it. But all goes to one hub and out from there.
Right.
Plus they invest in a lot of CapEx and fleet to actually deliver the infrastructure.
Right.
Right off the bat.
Right. So the innovation of FedEx was before FedEx came around and you were trying to ship something cross country. You would send it to UPS or the post office, and they had, say you were here in DC and you want to send something to LA, they would have a plane that went from DC to LA. If you want to send something to Minneapolis, they had a plane that went from here to Minneapolis. So each city had a bunch of flights that went to other cities, okay? And all the sorting was done at the point of where they received the packages. So you would imagine that would probably be the fastest way to get something. You just figure out where it's supposed to go and then fly it out there. What the innovation of FedEx did was that they realized, well, you know what? Why don't we just sort everything in one place? And that way we'll reduce a lot of flights because we just need to have one flight in and one flight out from each city in order to be able to deliver package anywhere in the world. Okay? So they figured out, well, we're going to be able to save money this way if we build this kind of system. And at first, they went to something like 40 different VC firms, and all of them turned them down because it just seemed so counterintuitive. What? You're going to ship something cross town, but you're going to ship it to the middle of the country and then ship it back to the same city? Doesn't make sense. But they were able to create this overnight service that really took off, worth obviously billions of dollars. Cosmo's problem is that they did not come up with this kind of a logistical system that would be able to do the kind of service that they wanted to provide in a cost-effective manner. So, in order to be able to deliver something, they were actually spending a lot more than they were making in terms of revenue. So the idea seemed really cool, but you got to worry about the execution. How are you actually going to make money off of this thing? Even though it seems like something that's a valuable service, but if it costs more to deliver than you can actually to make off of it, then it's not going to succeed. All right, Webvan and Peapod. Have you guys heard of Webvan or Peapod? Yeah.
They're both grocery and internet delivery services where you can order online and then they deliver it to your house.
Right. What do they deliver?
Groceries.
Groceries, right?
Groceries, yeah. Webvan believe, started during the dot-com boom.
They both started around the same time.
Okay, so they both started around the same time. Webvan raised an enormous amount of capital and started to take advantage of that capital and just built up infrastructure everywhere. But I think similar to maybe some other companies, they didn't understand what the customer wanted, and the sales revenues were way less than what they were anticipating, and they quickly, I think, went into bankruptcy.
Right. So Webvan is probably considered one of the most spectacular flameouts in the history of startups. I think they raised around $200–300 million right at the peak of the internet boom, and went out of business probably almost as fast. The idea here was that they were going to take online orders for groceries and then deliver them to you. Okay, pretty simple idea. Peapod's idea was exactly the same. Make online orders and then have them delivered to you. Webvan went out of business. Peapod is still around. I still use them sometimes. And so they had a successful IPO, done very well. Now the big difference, what's your name? Stephen. As Stephen pointed out, Webvan built a huge infrastructure. They had a bunch of guys who started this company who had awesome resumes, just a lot of experience building in big companies. So they were able to raise all this money. They built out this incredible state-of-the-art warehousing and logistical infrastructure, and they built the state-of-the-art order intake system. And nobody came. Nobody showed up. Nobody wanted to use what they had built, because they didn't go out and they didn't talk to the customers to see what they really wanted and see what their usage patterns were. They kind of assumed, oh, I've worked in this business for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. I know what the customer wants. So they went out and just built this incredible system, and nobody showed up. Peapod, on the other hand, decided to say, hey, we got to understand what's going on with our customers and how they actually order things, what they care about. Do they care about produce? What are the things that they need? And they built slowly. They built out in one city, made sure that they had things right, then moved out to another city, etc. So that's why Peapod is still around now. They were bought by Royal Ahold, which owns Stop and Shop and I think a couple other well-known grocery chains, and are doing well today. So what I've done probably here is kind of confuse you. Well, what determines a killer idea? My point here is that there's more to success than just an idea. And a good idea has to be matched up with all the other aspects of the business that you're trying to create. So there's idea generation and there's idea evaluation. These have to go hand in hand before you get that killer idea. And there's different ways of going about generating an idea. There's a deductive way, just sitting down and using logic to figure something out. There's an inductive way where you're just kind of experiencing things and you say, well, what if we try this, or what if we try that? And there's some other alternative ways that we'll talk about where you can come up with some ideas. And then in terms of idea evaluation, you want to think about what's the opportunity, what's your passion, is what you have come up with as an idea, is that a good fit for what you care about? And then the skills. Do you have the skills to make this happen? So I hear a lot of great ideas from students and from other entrepreneurs, and it's sad because a lot of times I'm like, well, you're not really the right person to do this. You don't have the team in place. You don't really know what you're doing. Either you have to build that team, or you got to move on to something else that you can actually do. So that's another part of what makes a killer idea. Okay, so idea generation is all about finding opportunities. And finding opportunities means finding problems out in the real world. Problems where somebody is experiencing some kind of pain, or opportunities where people are giving up something that they could gain. So it's about pain and it's about gain. And there's different ways of solving problems out there. Some problems can be solved by political solutions, or some can be solved by technical solutions, or some can be solved by whatever, violence, whatever, right? I mean, there's all different ways of solving different kinds of problems. What we're interested in here in the business plan competition is how do you solve problems using market solutions? Okay, where do you find solutions where somebody is willing to buy something, where there's some kind of transaction taking place, money is exchanging hands? So we need to find problems and then the solutions that are based on the market. In order to get people to buy something, you guys, money is hard to earn. It's hard to earn your money. So you need to have something that's worth buying in order for you to open up your wallet or write a check. So that requires that there has to be some kind of what we call a differentiated value proposition. I'm only going to buy this over something else if it's better and different for me than if I didn't use that money. Now, some of the reasons that somebody might buy something is that it's cheaper than something else, right? Or there may be some kind of benefits that I'm getting from it that I wouldn't get from another product that's out there. It may be something that has a completely new capability. It may be a new technology that provides different capabilities, or it may give me access to something that I wasn't able to get access to before. So these are some examples of differentiated value propositions that you want to think about as you're going out there and trying to find opportunities. One thing that I want you guys to do, and I can't stress this enough, is that I want you guys to think big. Especially first-time entrepreneurs and especially young entrepreneurs, when they're thinking about things to do for entrepreneurship or a startup, they don't think big enough. They're like, oh, I'm just a student, what can I do? But I want you guys to think really big, because this is an opportunity for you guys to make a real impact, to do something with your life and your time that you couldn't do otherwise. There's only 24 hours in a day, right? So you might as well use that time that you have to work on something big rather than something small, right? And the chances of success aren't necessarily more with a smaller idea. It's probably just as hard to build a small company as a big company in terms of the time that you have to put in. So might as well think big. Okay? Don't waste your time. Think big. So think about big problems and think about big solutions. Okay, so let's look at some of these deductive approaches. The first one is the idea of improving existing products or services. So think about the stuff that you guys use now. Maybe it's your some app that you guys use, and think about some way to make it better. That may be an opportunity there. Or a new application of an existing technology. Let's say that you're using some kind of technology in the medical field, but hey, why aren't they using this in some other industrial application or something like that? Okay. Third point, increasing reach. Now, increasing reach means, there may be some solution out there that's reaching only a small number of people. What's a way of getting that out to more people that might be able to use it? It's an idea of increasing reach. Okay, so these are some of the ideas. Let's think about some examples, recent examples of some of these things. Can people think about recent startups that have maybe used some of these approaches to create differentiated value propositions? Yes.
Yeah, like probably the increasing reach one. I think a good one is probably Starbucks, because there's always been coffee shops everywhere.
Right.
I was watching like a show yesterday, and there was a guy from the past who came to like a present time, and that they were driving around, and he said, "Oh, he used to be fine, but now it's a Starbucks." And then he drive at 5 minutes, and then that's another one. And is it a law that there has to be one at every block? So I think that Starbucks has increased like the reach of gourmet coffee, kind of like all over the world.
Right. So Howard Schultz, who's the founder of Starbucks, actually came and spoke at GW a year or two ago and talked about how he launched Starbucks. But yeah, that's a great example. I mean, lots of Americans drink coffee and love coffee. What Starbucks did was able to, as you said, put it on every street corner in America, right? So he increased the reach. So how did he do that? He sat down and thought about, well, I love coffee. How can I increase this so that everybody in America can enjoy a good cup of coffee? And he came up with the logistics. He came up with the marketing, the branding, et cetera, to be able to create Starbucks the way it is today. Right? So that's a great example. Yeah, Melanie.
So
slightly embarrassing, but I watched a lot of Korean dramas on dramafever.com. And
Like my mom and dad.
they watch dramafever.com.
I'm Korean, so yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot of Korean. I'll work on my Korean later. Anyway, so that I think is partnering with Hulu. It's very Hulu-esque, and I read somewhere I don't know about the back end of this company, and I think they are pretty directed partnering, so extending the reach. And I read, I believe 80% of the viewership looks like me, so just like random. I look at the comments. There's people with like Latin names, just like European, American, European names. So all these people are watching this amazing like drama export from Korea. Now they're diversifying into like Latin shows and you know getting more like Japanese shows on there. So it's just really interesting to see how they're just taking something that exists and bringing it to a new audience and kind of partnering and using this as their platform. Like Hulu's is very familiar to me, and I think you know cross-links, so it's like pretty brilliant.
Yeah, and actually
on the paid
Netflix.
subscribers. So, you know.
Netflix as well. So Netflix, I noticed about 2 or 3 years ago, all these Korean movies and dramas were showing up at Netflix, and I got my parents hooked on it now because they can watch them now.
So those are kind of competing. I noticed.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
yeah, that's great. What about new applications of existing technologies? Do people have ideas of that? Yes.
I just read one the other day, and innovators didn't actually come up with a technology that does exist, where they're tactile and they know how to type on the screen, and so they applied it to Deductive, the one that's a text.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example. And in fact, we have some technology that was developed here at GW for these gloves that have been licensed out to help with helping autistic children and other kinds of educational purposes for using hands to be able to, and these gloves to be able to do that kind of stuff too. But so there's lots of different applications. I worked with a startup from MIT that was using these gloves to be able to do hand signals for the military. Like if you're in a small group and you go like this, that lets everybody else in the squad know that they're supposed to stop or whatever, right? So yeah, taking these kinds of these technologies and applying them in different areas. That's a great example. What about customization? What might be an example of how you would create a new startup based on the customization of something already existing? Yeah.
Actually, the Starbucks one we use, but the progress is that now smaller coffee shop chains are taking the Starbucks model, but customizing it to be a more personal, more sort of high-end experience with on-site roasting and grinding.
Right. So segmenting the market even tighter so that you're getting it's not just great coffee, but it's great coffee from whatever, or whatever kind of experience that I'm looking for. Yes?
Actually, one in the local area, I coach youth soccer, and we always wanted personalized items for the team, and it was always very difficult because you had to have a minimum quantity order. You want silk screen printing or something, like 500, and you have 12 kids on the team.
Right.
And custom ink, which is actually located in Plant 15, right next to the field of practice on it, and actually had to be shipped to me from a different area. It has now come up with this model where you can just go online and buy different qualities of t-shirts and lots of products. Customize your logo, customize everything,
Yep.
and it gets to you in 7 days or 9 days.
Yeah. Pretty amazing, right? If you had to buy, in the old days, you wanted to buy a customized T-shirt, you had to buy 1,000 of them, right, and spend a lot of money. But now you can get customized T-shirts ordered exactly to your specifications. You can get your pet dog or your kid or whatever you want on it, right? And I'm sorry?
Shoes of Prey. It's very sophisticated. You can build your own shoe, like custom shoe, and they'll send it to you for like $100 or give or take.
Right.
I think it's a new startup that's out there.
It's great. One company that I worked with is, have you guys heard of Vermont Teddy Bear and Build-A-Bear Workshop? So that's the customization of teddy bears, right? So being able to, instead of just getting the Paddington teddy bear, whatever the teddy bear is, you could have your kid go in there and make their own teddy bear, put on the same whatever clothes, get it to be as fluffy or as soft as you want it to be, and all this kind of stuff. So customization. When I was looking at Build-A-Bear Workshop, they had gone from something like 0 to 100 shops in like less than 2 years, and well worth over $100 million at that point in just a couple of years. So pretty quick growing startup. Process or supply chain innovation. We actually talked about an example of that, which was FedEx, right? They were the ones who figured out how to ship things overnight quickly. Increasing scale. So taking advantage of scales of economy. What might be some examples of startups that are able to take advantage of those things? Yeah.
It's super easy with a lot of technology. I mean, you make something and make sure it works, and then there's nothing to it besides just sending it. I mean, you don't have to send it over to China and have it manufactured. You just
Right. Yeah. There's actually anything having to do with software, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, or manufacturing could be considered something where you're increasing the scale because you can make it more cheaply or you can distribute it easily. What else? Anything else?
Would something just like, I can't think of a specific example, but like luxury goods that, by reducing that price point, I don't know if design within reach or something of that nature where it tries to make something that's usually out of reach and therefore a smaller scale. Is that like, I can't think of an example. Is that an idea? Like,
yeah, sure. Like IKEA or design within reach, probably, like they brought good design into an affordable scale by increasing the scale. So actually furniture industry is a very interesting industry because I don't know if you guys have ever tried to order furniture. Like it drives me nuts because my wife's always ordering this furniture and then she's like, oh, it'll be here in the next 8 months. I'm like, what? 8 months? Why we're going to wait 8 months for a piece of furniture? But so that's traditionally the way that furniture was done. You ordered it, they made it when you ordered it. And for some reason, my wife won't shop at IKEA, but so we have to custom order that kind of stuff. But that's how it traditionally worked. And so, yeah, increasing this, they were able to make it cheaper enough by increasing the scale so that they didn't have to wait for an order in order to be able to deliver it. And that made it accessible to increase the scale. What about convergence? It's an idea of convergence as a way to create new technology. Yeah.
Would this be like Amazon Prime starting to offer videos and stuff, where they said their market of Amazon Prime actually overlaps with the same people that download streaming videos, therefore let's offer.
Sure. So packaging it up and creating something that's more valuable together than separately. Yeah, that's a good example. What else? Yes.
Would photography be one when Kodak was sticking to traditional photos and then some of these technology firms like Samsung who historically weren't involved with pictures came to the digital space?
Yeah. So actually that's kind of the example I was kind of hoping people would think about was the convergence of cell phone, music player, everything now in your phone. It's not really a startup, iPhone's not a startup, but it's an idea of innovation occurring through convergence, right? If there's some other examples of where people have brought different capabilities, different functions together. Yes.
Pretty limited scope of what people can do, but people from other industries can see how they can apply it to their expertise.
Right. So the idea of applying computing in different areas and things. The recent example of Waze. Does anybody use Waze on their cell phone? Right. It's a navigation tool. Right. It recently got bought. I can't remember, by Google for a couple $2 billion. Right. So this was a startup out in Israel that startup Waze, and the idea of convergence. Hey, let's take a navigator, let's put it on a cell phone, let's get crowdsourced information on there, and we'll make a better navigator. Now Google says, oh, that's a great idea. Let's buy it and put it just on our Android stuff, or whatever they're trying to do with it. Okay, those are really awesome examples. And so the point here is that you can come up with these ideas by just thinking and deducting from what you're observing out there in the real world, right? You can say, well, I see these different trends and things going on. There's these navigators and these cell phones and there's this crowdsourcing stuff. Maybe I can bring it together and create a Waze, right? And make $2 billion. Okay. Now, a source of discontinuity, just a continuation of the deductive approach, but one of the best ways of deducting different types of ideas is by looking at what is going on in the world around us, looking for discontinuity, so something that's a change, something that's happening that creates some kind of disruption in the way things are done, in people's habits or whatever. So, for example, we're looking at discontinuity in society, things like demographic changes. And this is a very important one because we have a special prize in the business plan competition that's sponsored by the AARP, which is around actually this discontinuity in the this aging society issue, right? You've probably heard this. Our society is aging. People are living longer, so the average age is getting older. So as this market increases, people getting older, what are some of the things that might happen? What might create opportunities that have to have new solutions to because people are getting older? Some examples, yeah. Healthcare, right? If you have an aging society, then healthcare issues that are important to older people are probably going to there are going to be opportunities there. Because there's going to be more people who have problems, who have, bad backs, or have, Alzheimer's or whatever. There's going to be more people, so there's got to be more solutions to help them. What else?
Supervision, like 24-hour supervision for the aging population, and the other that means geriatric daycare.
Right.
Becoming more popular where bodies are learning you drop off by the picture of college today.
Huge problem, right? As we get older, how do we take care of all these people who may need constant supervision? Because nursing homes are super expensive, and in a lot of cases they don't work well. Nobody wants to put their parents in a nursing home. How do you figure out solutions for that? There's a huge opportunity there. In fact, that's actually one of the target areas for the AARP prize. How do we deal with isolation, and how do we deal with supervision of elderly people who need that kind of help in a cost-effective way? Right, so that's an example of things that you can sit down and just kind of think and brainstorm about. How do I find solutions to these big changes that are going on in society? Lifelong education. Like the educational field right now is just changing dramatically, right? There's a lot of these MOOCs. Have you guys heard of MOOCs? We're actually using a MOOC for our Lean Startup workshops, and I'll talk about that later, but these massive online courses that are free, that people can just go online and view, and you can get a whole MIT degree now, actually, and you can't get the degree, but you can take all the courses online from MIT. MIT's put all its courses online. So there's opportunities around lifelong education. Have you guys heard of Khan Academy or Code Academy and all these kinds of things? Lots of opportunities there. Food and population, right? We're starting a new urban food institute here at GW. I know Melanie's probably have seen a lot of things in the social entrepreneurship side, and how do we deal with delivering food and water, etc. There's a lot of opportunities here. Globalization. There's cultural things. There's new technologies coming up all the time. The internet, perhaps one of the most important technology advances in history. How many startups have started from just the internet as a disruptive technology? So what are some other new technologies that you guys have been hearing about in the news that seem really like there may be some opportunities there? Yeah.
3D printing.
3D. I love 3D printing. So tell me, for people who don't know what that is, what does that mean?
So basically it works like a regular printer, except you can print objects in using different materials. So you can print this bottle and it will be made out of plastic and look exactly like this one.
Right. So you all have printers that print out one line on your piece of paper. The genius of 3D printing is that it lays down a line, then lays down another line on top of it, and keeps building something, so you get a three-dimensional structure.
I have to interject here, shapeways.com, which allows different designers to produce their goods. So it's like a brilliant way for them to make money and to make some nice marketplace. So how's this for living in the future, guys? I got my favorite meme, which is a T-Rex going with these little hand extenders as a 3D printed sandstone sculpture. The future is now. It's very exciting. Sorry. Also embarrassing, but true.
So you can get T-Rex memes, or
Steal it.
some of the things that I've seen 3D printing being talked about for, and actually we're getting developed here at GW, is being able to print out people's organs. You need a new heart, print out a new heart on a 3D printer. You need new knee replacement, print it out on a 3D printer. So there's just so many opportunities here for 3D printing that we haven't even thought of yet. That's ripe for the picking. Markets, opportunities when there's some kind of government change in policy. Being here in GW and being here in DC, there's probably a lot of people who follow policy and politics out there. Whenever you see a new policy change, there's an business opportunity there. Okay, so think about that. Supply chain disruptions. Whenever there's a single source for a certain valuable commodity or material, and anytime there's a disruption there's got to be a way to try to find substitutions for that, right? Or trying to find different channels to be able to get it from another place that may have been too difficult before. So anytime there's these kind of supply chain disruptions, there's also opportunities there. So these are some of the ways of coming up with ideas from observations of the world around you. Any questions or comments here? Yes?
For a supply chain disruption, would you count like a sudden unexpected price change? Like I was just thinking about high fructose corn syrup and how there's sort of public outcry about potential effects, and with corn being used for fuel now, the price is going up, and so food manufacturers are looking for more cost-effective sweeteners to use as a replacement. I mean, is that different than a disruption?
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, the supply chain disruption is if I'm manufacturing Twinkies or cupcakes or whatever, and I use high fructose corn syrup in my recipe, and the price suddenly goes up, and now I can no longer make them and make money. I got to find an alternative. What's a cheaper alternative? And there may be an opportunity there. Right? Yeah. Yep.
And I'm not sure where along like the list this might fall, but if there's any, I guess, natural like disaster or climate change, anything like that, that is usually I guess an opportunity, for like a lot of places, like provide aid, for that, or provide aid inside a unique way, like more fashion, and that can at times become a new area like a business.
Sure. Right. I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of opportunities in climate change and that kind of stuff, right? I mean, there's just so many things going on that we just don't know what's going to happen, but we've got to try to kind of come up with solutions for them. That's what the whole social entrepreneurship thing is about, right? Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and think about inductive and alternative approaches for coming up with the killer idea. This is my favorite. Irritating situations, okay? So we've all been in situations where like, God, this sucks. I wish I could make it better, okay? The difference between an entrepreneur and your average run-of-the-mill person is that, average run-of-the-mill person goes, God, this sucks, and then they forget about it, right? But the entrepreneur is like, God, this sucks. How can I make this better? And I'm going to change it. I'm going to make it better, okay? So that's the idea here behind this, is that you run into something where there's an inconvenience, a poor service, where there's some kind of challenge, and you come up with a way to do it better. One thing I like, one kind of trick to use is like think like a lazy person, right? Not that any of us in this room is lazy, but let's like pretend to think like a lazy person and think about how can I make this really easy? What's the example that I used earlier about how a startup succeeded whereas another failed? Mint, right? So Mint thought like a really lazy person who doesn't want to deal with their finances. I'm not saying that's you. I'm just saying, most people don't want to spend hours behind, with a spreadsheet. So they thought like a lazy person and made it really easy for that person to manage their finances. So think like a lazy person. Look at irritating situations. This is a relatively specialized one where you start with the technology first and then you try to find a problem to solve. But this happens a lot in a university setting. So you've got some of you may be engineers or scientists, you're working with a professor and you come up with this new advance in the lab. That's really cool scientifically, but maybe there's some way to apply what you've just done in the lab in the real world. And then you go out and try to find a problem to solve. That's another way of an alternative way of trying to come up with a great idea. Case study. Okay, so I'm going to talk about one of the companies that I helped launch a while ago. For those of you who are in my Lean Startup Workshop, I've already mentioned this before, so bear with me while I repeat it. But one of the companies that I helped launch is called Agamatrix. And they started out with a technology that they had developed in the lab. Well, not really a lab, but there's an electrical engineer. With something he called dynamic electrochemical sensing. Okay, dynamic. The idea here was that chemical sensors for a long time had really not experienced any kind of advances because they were focused on how do I improve my accuracy or my sensitivity using chemical means. Okay. These guys were electrical engineers, and they said, well, I think there's a way to improve chemical sensors, electrochemical sensors, by looking at the electric side of it. What can we do with the signal processing side of electrochemical sensors to make them better? So their advance was to say, hey, rather than just taking static readings of the chemicals that we're doing, let's take a bunch of readings. Let's use different voltages, let's use different amperages, let's use different waveforms and that kind of thing, and then see what kind of additional information we can get from the samples that we're taking. Okay? So that was their technical advance. So they were able to make better electrochemical sensors. But that wasn't enough. They got to figure out, well, why do we care? Why does the world care that we have better electrochemical sensors? And again, for those of you who are in my Lean Startup Workshop, don't say anything yet because I want to have the rest of the class think about it a little bit. What are some things that you could do with a more accurate electrochemical sensor? Any ideas? Or were all of you at my Lean Startup Workshop? Anyone want to try to hazard a guess?
That's like glucose.
Yeah, that was the glucose thing. There you go. Okay. Well, so usually when I do this and then people haven't heard about it before, people will say, well, what about industrial sensors? Maybe you can use it to test for gas spills or things like that. But the market that we were able to settle on was the blood glucose market. And the reason for that is, diabetics, unfortunately, is a growing population around the world. And it's a huge population. We're talking about tens of millions of people who are diabetics. And they have to check their blood, depending on what kind of diabetes you have, multiple times a day. So there's a constant need for test strips. It's something that you use for the rest of your life. There's just a huge market here. And we looked into, being able to make those blood glucose monitors better. So that was how we took this. We had a technology first, and then we found a problem to try to solve. Okay. For the students here, what I would suggest, one way to find ideas is to go talk to your professors, see what kinds of things that they're working on, and maybe they'll partner up with you to do entry into the business plan competition. Because I'll tell you, in the last couple of years, the teams that have some of the teams that have won have typically been professors working with their students. So they've got some kind of technology. Professors, for the most part, they don't want to launch companies, but they will work with students because the students can be the ones who run with the idea and bring it up to market. So I encourage you guys to think about that as a possibility. Okay, team first. If you talk to most VCs and you ask them whether the team is more important or the idea is more important, people will say the team is more, well, most VCs will say the team is more important. So one way of doing this is just kind of come up with your dream team. Think, okay, I'm an engineer. Let me get the best business guy I know. Let me get the best domain expert in whatever area that I think there's an opportunity. Let's just sit down together and brainstorm. And you can go through all these inductive and deductive approaches, but the idea here is to first get your team together, a team that you'd like to work with and that you are comfortable with and you think will work well together, and go out and just brainstorm. And I think that's actually perhaps the best way to go about a lot of good idea building. And then just the last point there is to just be aware all the time of what's going on around you. What are those irritations? What are the things that bother you? And try to think, well, instead of just kind of brushing it off, think about, well, how can I change this? How can I make this easier to do? And while I'm at it, maybe I can make some money. Or maybe I can change the world. Maybe I can make this world a better place. So incorporate this entrepreneurial thinking into your everyday life, into what you do every day. Any questions so far? Okay. Now, I told you earlier that it's not enough to just have a good idea. You've got to be able to match that up with the opportunity, right? So what are some of the things that you have to think about when you come up with an idea about whether it's a good idea? The first part here is the timeliness. So I have worked on a lot of startups that failed because they were before their time. Okay? There was not the right infrastructure in place. There weren't the right customers. The technology hadn't caught up to what we needed to do, so that it just wasn't a current problem or need that could be solved. Okay, so that's to the point of timeliness and solvability. There's also the issue of access to resources. You may come up with the coolest nuclear fusion idea in the world, but if you're not a nuclear physicist, you don't have $1 billion to invest, you're just not going to be able to create a startup around your nuclear fusion startup idea, right? So you've got to think about, well, what are my access to resources, people, funding, technology, and markets before you can say, this is the killer idea. Now, I also told you to think big, so you can work on getting the access to this, but got to be realistic. Potential profitability. Now, this especially, I think, is an important thing to think about for social entrepreneurs, because social entrepreneurs forget this aspect of it all the time. But the revenue streams that you guys generate have to be greater than what you spend, even in a nonprofit, right? We call it a nonprofit, but that doesn't mean you still don't have to bring in revenue. You got to bring in revenue. You just aren't able to save the money that you bring in, the excess, and call it profit. You've got to spend it all. That's kind of the difference, right? But if you can't get this equation to work, meaning the cost of delivering something to the customer is less than the value to the customer, then you're just not going to have anything sustainable. It's just going to die. So that is critical. You may have the most important, greatest idea, but if it costs $1 million and you only are able to generate $500,000 in revenue, it's not going to work. Okay. Importance. Again, I told you guys got to think big. But it's also in terms of what the customer feels about the product that you're doing. Is this something that they need to have, or is it something that's just kind of nice to have for them? This is really critical. It doesn't mean that you can't create a startup out of something that's a nice-to-have product or service, but it's a lot tougher. If you can find something that somebody needs to have, it's a lot easier to do a startup. Okay? So that's another thing that you want to think about. There's also this issue of importance. When you're doing a startup, it's tough to build a startup off of something that's just incrementally better than something else that's already out there. Because when you're a startup, you're competing against an incumbent that probably is bigger, better funded, more well-known, etc. than you. So if you're just a little bit better, people probably aren't going to take the risk and buy your thing instead of what's already out there. Because they don't know if you're going to be in business a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, right? So they're not willing to take that chance unless, kind of the rule of thumb is unless you're like 10 times better than something out there already. Either you're reducing their costs by 10 times, you're 10 times faster, you're 10 times cooler, whatever. That's just kind of a general rule of thumb. If you're just a little bit better, it's really tough.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Just for the importance, I mean, some of the really big players, like, Coca-Cola, we don't need to have sugar water
Sure.
bubbles in it. Some of the most valuable brands, or alcohol, no one needs to have alcohol, and it's huge. There's a lot of fashion stuff. So I'm just asking, like, can you give an example where, like, this is it just kind of a thing to think about, or, like, what about, like, those kind of...
So Coca-Cola is no longer a startup, at least for the last 100 years or so.
It's true.
So,
I mean, the products, like, a lot of really
but when they
strong
started out, it's probably hard. I don't know the history of Coca-Cola, but when it's a nice to have product, it's just a lot tougher to get it sold than if it's a need to have, right? So I'm guessing.
There's like a lot of crowded markets for that as well. Usually, like a fashion market, or you can do it, but there's just a lot
Right.
in those need to have.
Well, it depends on your perspective. You may need to have that new Louis Vuitton bag, right?
Well, you
But-
could create it. I mean, there's a lot of like marketing
You can create
around
that
it,
need,
and a lot of
right? Exactly.
churning kind of in those.
I mean, for example, Facebook or LinkedIn is a good example. When it first started out, LinkedIn and Facebook were probably nice to have things. But nowadays, especially LinkedIn, if you're in the professional world, it's kind of becoming a need to have thing.
It becomes a different animal.
It becomes a different animal.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
I'd love to get off Facebook, but I can't because you need it for checking professional-related events. Even there's
Yeah.
invitations.
Yep.
You have to market there, and I can't just shut it down. It won't
Right.
work for my
It's become a need to
profession.
have. If you can make that switch over, you got a gold mine there.
That's true.
Well, and I'm just thinking, from a non-business perspective, it's all how you frame what you mean by need and nice. I mean, you don't really need that much to survive and live through a day. But when you talk about maybe emotional needs or psychological needs, like a need for belonging
Yeah.
or a need for, friendship and social interaction, that kind of thing. So I think some of these ideas can be framed as needs if you think creatively.
So when I'm talking about it from this perspective, I mean, in the mind of your customer, is it a need to have or a nice to have? And as you said, that can be how you frame it. A good marketer will make that customer feel like they need to have that, right? Whether it's the next Louis Vuitton bag or if it's, entertainment, something, whatever. But so good point. Okay, last one there is the favorable environment. So this growing market, that's a really, really important point. I encourage you guys to look at growing markets instead of stagnant or shrinking markets. It's just dramatically easier to sell into a growing market. And why? It's kind of intuitive, but it's even more than intuitive. Think about it. If you are selling into a growing market, that means there's new customers coming into the market every day that haven't already made a choice between your product versus the incumbent product, right? So you're almost on a level playing ground with the new customers coming into a growing market. If you're in a stagnant market, every customer that you take has to be taken away from the incumbent, right? So you have to be able to be better by a lot than the incumbent to be able to steal. And if you're in a shrinking market, obviously it's even worse, right? So whenever you can find a growing market, that's where you should go. It's much better than trying to sell into a shrinking market. And then there's all these other kinds of things, the context of your idea. What are the regulations? What's the culture? Something that may work well in the United States may not work in another country, right? What's the technical infrastructure? You may have a great idea, but is there the infrastructure around your idea to be able to work? So all of these are factors that you have to take into consideration when you're thinking about whether you've got a good idea or not. Yeah.
I'm curious to know if a student comes up with an idea and, for example, it is a good idea, it's always competition. So I guess with the GW, is there any kind of safety nets that you all help? So if a student comes with a great idea and wins a business plan, that some competitor out there that has so much more capital isn't just captivating it and taking it to market before it's widely distributed.
So what do you mean by safety net?
Like if it's something that you all can help, like proprietary, like helping them with the legal aspect of getting it proprietary, or whatever details might be, resources that the business plan offers to help the student kind of secure their idea, so a big giant doesn't come in and just swipe it.
Well, so I wouldn't call it a safety net, but what we try to do here with the business plan competition is create a friendly, happy, safe environment where we bring in mentors, outside experts, et cetera, to try to help you as much as possible. We can't promise you that there's not going to be someone out there bigger and stronger, faster than you, but that's the whole idea about access to resources. When you're doing a startup, you have to think about what is your access to resources. I wouldn't personally want to take Microsoft head on in any market, or take on Google, or whatever, but that you kind of have to take that into consideration. There's really no safety net in entrepreneurship. It's a contact sport. So.
But I also think we should mention we work very closely with a law firm known in DC, Blank Rome. They're one of our major sponsors. And actually we have a workshop exactly on this question every spring. So you'll be able to interact with, an attorney who deals with questions of this nature on a daily basis. So just as a resource, if you're curious.
Well, so Denise is referring to intellectual property. I don't know if that's what you were talking about.
It kind of sounded like.
Intellectual property and some other things as well, but that definitely is included in it.
Right. So one thing about intellectual property is that I think most first-time entrepreneurs put too much stock in the idea of intellectual property and someone stealing their idea, whereas in reality, most people aren't going to steal your idea. And if your idea is that easy to steal, then it's probably not defensible in the first place, right? So most first-time entrepreneurs are afraid to talk about their idea, but really when you're starting out, you should really try to talk to as many people as possible to get feedback, to understand what the customers are and what the problems might be. Yes?
One question on that, Jim. Given the new, I can't remember what it's called, new first to file, and the fact that you can now patent a design, because the rectangle that has rounded edges, Apple versus Samsung, is that not a concern when, I hear what you're saying. You've got to get your idea out there. You can't talk about it for more than 2 minutes or an hour. It's not that novel to begin with. Is that affecting things, the new changeover that's going to take place? I think it's the end of this 2014, or is it your first to file?
So the new patent laws are very important for certain areas. Like if you guys are developing a new drug, this stuff is very important because patents are everything in the pharmaceutical business. In software, it's not so important because it takes 2 or 3 years to get a patent, and by that time the software is already changed. So it really kind of depends on what field you're in. So it's really kind of on a case-by-case basis. If you have questions about your technology, about whether it's something that you need to try to patent or protect before you go out and talk about it publicly, then feel free to contact me and I'll help you work through those issues.
I have a quick question. I went for the NCIIA. I went to the patent office, U.S. Patent Office, for some workshops, and some of their officials were saying 2 years ago that a patent is more of a hunting license than it is a protection, because any larger company that wants to come and steal your idea will just put you out of business in the legal proceedings. So it's more valuable, they were saying, essentially. If you're small, you want to protect yourself. But that's kind of, in a way, they're saying in a very practical sense, it's not going to protect you. It's more like, I have friends that work at Google, and I think Google's finally doing their first taking on someone who keeps trying to steal from them. They usually ignore it, but now they're like, okay, you're poking the bear too much. We're going to have to go to court with you. So anyway, I don't know if you felt like that was, because I know you have a lot of experience in tech.
Yeah, so
about that.
Absolutely. So even if you do get a patent, there's no guarantee that it's going to protect you because, first of all, it's tough to get a patent, right? There's just a lot of prior art. The patent examiners would rather just deny all your claims and hope that you don't come back, rather than really kind of see whether or not you've got something novel there. But even if you do get the patent, it's tough to know if somebody's infringing on your patent, especially if you've got a software patent. How do you know that your innovation that's being used in the Apple iPhone is really being used? You don't have access to their code. You don't know exactly what's going on behind them, so it's very difficult to even know if somebody's infringing on what your idea is. And then even if you do know, it costs millions and millions of dollars to be able to prosecute it. So I think the better thing to do is to, instead of worrying too much about patents and all that kind of stuff at this stage, is to, you know, go out there, do what you want to, do what you're trying to do, and make yourself get enough momentum that anybody who is seeing what you're doing, that wants to do what you're doing, they'd rather buy you than try to recreate what you already did. Right? That's kind of that's the best protection. Okay. Any other questions on this? Okay, so this is kind of a summary of all the stuff that I had just been talking about before. This little thing in the middle, I'll explain that a little bit more, but that represents your startup. So these are all the different forces that are pushing on your startup or pulling on your startup. There's things that are about the competition, competitive analysis. There's stuff about macroeconomics here. You know, what's the market analysis? And up top are the trends, the things that are happening, the disruption, discontinuity. So this is a representation of all the different things that we just kind of talked about. This is available in the business model. I forgot to put that up there, where the source is. But this is from a book called Business Model Generation by Alexander Osterwalder. It's a great book. It's one of the two or three must-read books if you want to do something in entrepreneurship seriously. Okay. This up here is a business model canvas. And for those of you who have been to the Lean Startup Workshop, you're familiar with this already. But this is a graphical way of representing your startup. And even though we call this the business model competition, it's really more about the business model. The business plan is just a snapshot of your business model and kind of in prose form. Okay? So if you are developing your idea, I recommend you guys to come to the Lean Startup Workshops, which we hold on Fridays, and we'll go over this in a lot more detail. Talking about how do you come up with the value proposition, who are you selling it to, how do you keep your customers, how do you deliver your product to your customers, how do you maintain key resources, key partners, etc., all this kind of stuff. We're going to go over in the Lean Startup Workshop. But this is the way that you vet your idea. So you come up with your killer business idea, and then this helps you figure out whether or not it's actually going to work. Okay? By putting it into these different boxes, and then going out and talking to potential customers to make sure that your vision of reality and what your startup is going to do in the world is actually coincides with what reality is. It's an iterative process, so you should not get overly frustrated if your original idea that you came up with, you thought was the brilliant idea, turns out to be off. Okay, you may go out there and you may find out, oh, it's actually not this idea, it's this idea, and I was wrong. And then, don't let that crush your ego, because 99% of the time, your original idea is going to be wrong. It's going to be something else, right? So you only know that by going out and talking to customers and coming up with a better idea as you get additional feedback. Once you settle in on the idea, then you can start scaling it up and building your company. But a startup is really not a company yet. A startup is really just a search organization. It's a search organization trying to find that right business model. Once you settle on that right business model, that's when you start worrying about creating the company. And then so that's what we're going to be doing in the next few months as we're leading up to the business plan competition. We're going to help you try to find that right business model and find out who your customers are and whether you do have that killer business model, business idea. Okay? And so I encourage you guys to come to the Lean Startup Workshop, which Melanie and I teach on Fridays. Okay. So now the exhortation is for you guys to get out of the building. As soon as you leave here, I want you guys to start talking to potential customers about your idea. We want to get you out of the building. I want you to start networking. Okay? Start talking to people who are different than you. If you're an engineer, don't just talk to engineers. If you're an MBA, don't just talk to MBAs. Go out and mix with each other and talk to each other, because you got to be able to get perspectives from different people to really be able to have a full dynamic team and ideas and good feedback. If you don't have an idea, just go out and start doing internships or get jobs working with startups. We have our Startup Career Expo. We do that in the spring, but University of Maryland does one in the fall. That's open to all of you guys as well. You go out there and just see what a startup's all about. Start reading blogs, industry journals in the area of your idea to get familiar with what the environment is, what are the current things that are out there right now. Trade shows are awesome. Whenever you can go to a trade show in the field of what you want to do, you should go and talk to people. Research your competitors. You can even study patents and licenses to get ideas of what kinds of technologies are out there. Wired magazine, all that kind of stuff are good things. TechCrunch. I don't know if you guys have heard of TechCrunch. If you're in the internet space or software space, start reading a lot and figuring things out. But the main thing is to get out of the building if you do have an idea and talk to potential customers. This is starting to get a little bit old, but I'm putting it up here because I like what Y Combinator did. But these are some of the ideas that one of the premier accelerators out there, Y Combinator, put up on their website and said, hey, these are problems out there in the world that we think need solutions. If you can come up with a good solution, we will fund you. Right? So these are some of the ideas that they have for problems that need to be solved. Alternatives to movie piracy and file sharing. So, the big problem with the music industry was that people were doing all kinds of piracy, and then they tried to sue their customers, and that caused a lot of problems, right? And so they ended up having to now pay Apple, only getting $1. Apple only gets $1 per song. And then the music companies get just a portion of that as well, right? Whereas the movie industry has taken a different approach than the music industry, and they're actually, I think, getting a bigger cut of the revenue for the stuff that they're doing. But the alternatives to movie piracy and file sharing are things like Netflix or Hulu, that kind of thing that have come up. And so some of these problems are getting solved already. Simplified browsing. New news, outsourced IT. This stuff is all online at ycombinator.com, ideas/.html. If you can come up with an idea to one of these problems, it's a good start. So next step, Lean Startup Workshops, Fridays at 1 p.m. There's a Udacity course that is free, that's online, that we use for the Lean Startup Workshop. So if you want to go, I didn't have a chance to put up the URL, but if you just go to udacity.com and you look up how to build a startup, it'll be right there. And I recommend that. It's a great course. Any questions? Well, I want to thank you all for coming today, and good luck with your customer development as you get out of the building and find that killer business idea. Thanks.